chains or complex webs of jobs which need to be run in precise order. Making sure that this is well understood is the first challenge in testing batch systems. Often all the inputs to a batch system occur near the front of the chain of activity. This means that your test team will have to understand the branches that occur in the process, understand the data permutations that cause those individual branches of code to be actioned, and then build a full set of input data to make sure that all the target branches of code are exercised properly. Related to this is the fact that batch systems often make extensive use of reference material, and this usually contains date-sensitive information. This further increases the challenge in setting up tests, as some approach must be found to mitigate against date dropping out of significant date ranges, and thereby affecting the functioning of that system. In all cases, this makes analysis and preparation even more important when setting up batch testing, as it could take hours, days, or even weeks to identify that a test has failed due to data issues. Similarly, batch systems tend to generate a lot of output, and analysing that output can be very difficult and time-consuming, even under favourable conditions. Finally, and uniquely to FPS, this is not a pure batch system, but rather a hybrid, whereby the batch activity generates a large number of asynchronous but still real-time transactions. Let's look at regression testing next. Regression testing is an area that can mean slightly different things to different people. Here, I mean testing software that has not been directly changed, but could have been impacted by changes in other systems. Since the work needed to support FPS will cross multiple systems, analysis is again essential to determine what other parts of the organisation's computing suite could have been impacted by the changes made, and how important it is to regression test that part of their functionality. It is likely that the project will only have time to test the most important functionality, so this must be identified successfully. And again, since the testing will need to cross multiple systems, the likelihood of one person or even one team understanding all the functionality is very slim. Documentation will be critical, and in particular the documentation of the regression tests themselves and the reasons why those particular tests were selected is key to success. Finally, since FPS is a large and complex system to implement, there is a strong chance that multiple phases of deployment will be required, and consequently it is very probable that some key functionality will need to be regression tested several times. Because of this, it becomes possible to build a strong case for producing an automated regression test pack that can be used for each release of code. By focusing on business processes and on functionality that is likely to stay the same, it should also be possible to build the regression test pack in parallel with other functional testing, saving elapsed time for the project as a whole. Okay, let's look at performance testing next. In many projects, this is a tacked-on phase of testing at the end. In FPS, however, the whole point of the project is to allow quick transactions, so performance testing needs to be a key part of the test strategy. Because of the real-time nature of the messages being sent via FPS, each message send-receive pair has an SLA associated with it. If the SLA is not met, then the switch takes action, generally reversing the transaction currently in flight. The scheme operator IPL recognises that performance testing is key, and so requires that potential scheme members undertake multiple rounds of performance testing with them before they can join operationally. Even before that, performance testing is critical, and performance should be built into the design of your implementation. You should consider how to bring performance testing earlier into the life cycle than where it normally resides near the end, and look at how elements of the system can be bench tested early to facilitate this. Making sure that developers are clear on the SLAs to be met is also critical to success. When the elements of your implementation are all in place, it becomes necessary to performance test the solution as a whole. This means loading the infrastructure via all the different channels available at the same time, perhaps having a daytime work pattern and an evening work pattern, as the mix of activities is intended to be different in these two time slots. Each individual channel might need a different technical solution to resolve it. Chances are that the web and telephone users can be simulated with the same tools, just using a slightly different way, but there is a strong likelihood that a completely different approach will be needed for the batch activity. This also needs to be thought about upfront and plans made accordingly. Also, providing the data to support a high volume of transactions can be a challenge in its own right, and is often solved again by the use of the performance test tools, this time to build a set of test data. Finally, you need to consider inbound performance testing as well as outbound. To test your system's inbound capacity in the first instance, you will need to use a performance message simulator. The tool provided by IPL is only usable for functional testing as it comes, but can be expanded upon for use in performance test scenarios. The implementation for performance testing, however, is quite different to the implementation for functional testing, which adds further technical challenge to the process. Let's round off this look at testing challenges with a consideration of the technical testing beyond performance. One of the early stages of cooperative testing with IPL is connectivity testing. This focuses on establishing successful communications with the switch, and this is made more difficult by a couple of factors. Firstly, the central infrastructure is split across 4 physical locations to give it extremely high levels of resilience. This means that your systems must be able to handle key sharing across multiple sites. Also, each institution participating in the scheme is allocated a specific number of channels, dependent on their projected use of the system. First Wave members found it difficult to manage these connections effectively, thereby reducing the capacity that they had on the system. Related to this is the fact that FPS is a 24/7 system, with very high levels of reliability and resilience built in. Members are expected to be available to the system all the time, and consequently you need to develop a solution whereby you can carry out scheduled maintenance and upgrades without interrupting service, and you also need your system to have redundancy built in to maintain your connection to the system if any key element should fail. And all these features, of course, need to be tested before your solution can be put live. That marks the final phase of testing I want to look at with FPS, and so I'd like to leave you with a summary. The first thing to keep in mind is that FPS will require a very broad range of testing to ensure your organisation can implement it successfully. Also, the system is very complex and its behaviour needs to be understood so that your solution can be designed correctly and the system as a whole can be verified as working to design. As well as the system being complex, the technology is complex, and since this is based on a broad range of technologies, a similarly broad spectrum of testing approaches will need to be used. Whilst it's becoming more widely recognised that testing is a major element of any successful project, this is doubly true of an FPS implementation, and so adequate time should be allocated to testing, and the analysis work should start as soon as possible in the project lifecycle. Similarly, we must resist the temptation to squeeze testing should things start to slip. This becomes a very risky approach with a system like FPS, and could result in very public failure that could seriously damage the reputation of your organisation. Finally, always remember that IPL maintain a series of quality gates that your organisation must successfully pass through in agreed testing windows before being allowed to join the scheme for real. Keep these factors in mind, and achieving FPS compliance can be accomplished in a timely and cost-effective manner. I'd like to thank you for your time, and if you'd like further information on FPS or AppLabs, please contact us via our marketing team.